Shiloh Christian Church, good morning to all of you. Thank you for being here with us this morning. And Jen Brown, happy birthday. Hope all of you have had a great week. There was a group of us elk hunting this past week, and we had an unfortunate run with a skunk. And so last weekend, a group of us got to watch the sermon, watch our service time at a laundromat. And while there are so many things right now that we could complain about, so many things that maybe are not going the way that we wish they would, there's a lot of blessings that are also going on right now. There's a lot of things that that COVID, that the fires, that the circumstances of life have made possible for all of us. And one of those things is the opportunity for us to be together, not just in a building, but in homes and laundromats. As Tiffany mentioned last week, even in the homes of other people, we're able to be together. We're able to come together on Sunday mornings and any other time during the week as the body of Christ. And so this morning, as we begin our time of worship, I want to encourage you to stop looking at the negative things. Don't look at the things to grumble about, to complain about. Don't forget the one who's in control. Don't forget the one who has willed everything that has ever happened, the one who holds our lives in his hand, the one who we get to worship this morning. And as we begin this time, I want to read to you just a few verses from Psalms 95. It says, "Come, let us sing for joy to the Lord. Let us shout out loud to the rock of our salvation. Let us come before him with thanksgiving and extol him with music and song. For the Lord is a great God, the great King above all gods. In his hand are the depths of the earth, and the mountain peaks belong to him. The sea is his, for he made it, and his hands formed the dry land." Let's worship him this morning.
You hear me when I call. You are my morning song. Though darkness fills the night, it cannot hide the light. Whom shall I fear? You crush the enemy underneath my feet. You are my sword and shield, though troubles linger still. Whom shall I fear? I know who goes before me. I know who stands behind. The God of angel armies is always by my side. The one who reigns forever, he is a friend of mine. The God of angel armies is always by my side. My strength is in your name, for you alone can save. You will deliver me. Yours is the victory. Whom shall I fear? Whom shall I fear? I know who goes before me. I know who stands behind. The God of angel armies is always by my side. The one who reigns forever, he is a friend of mine. The side. Take all I have in me,
Hey Shiloh, good morning. Before we get started with the message today, as most of you watching this probably know, there are some pretty serious fires going on pretty close to home right now. So before we get started with today's message, I know that everybody involved, both the people in homes in the fire and near the fire, the first responders, I know that everybody could use some prayers right now, so let's just say a quick prayer together for them before we get started with the message today. God, there is a crazy, unpredictable, out of control fire raging outside right now. Please look over and wrap your arms around the first responders that are dealing with this right now. Help them to fight this fire effectively, keep them safe, keep their families and loved ones safe. Help all the families that are having to evacuate because of this fire, be with them, comfort them during this crazy time. We know that you have the power to stop this fire, so if it's in your will, please do so. And if not, please help us learn to rest in you and not rest in the things of this world. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so last week we talked about where science falls short in our quest to understand and explain both ourselves and the world around us. So today I want to start by building on that discussion and talk about why the Christian story is the best way to understand both ourselves and the world around us. I want to dive into why naturalism, this idea that the material world is all that exists while appealing and rational at first glance, does not actually make sense when we look at the reality of our existence. I also want to discuss why the Christian story provides the only realistic and satisfying route to explaining the world, achieving true happiness, and finding meaning in our own lives and the world around us. After talking about why Christianity is the best way to explain the way the world is and the way humanity is, I think looking into why anybody should believe it's actually true is an important step. To do that, we'll go through some of the historical evidence for the resurrection of Jesus, the claim that all of Christianity rests upon. As with last week, my goal is not to try and convert you to a Christian in one go, but for you to leave with a renewed sense of curiosity about Jesus and an intellectual respect for the role that faith in God play in our lives. So let's talk about why naturalism does not give us an acceptable view of reality. Where do you get your sense of right and wrong? This is one of those things that is so foundational to who we are as humans that we often take its existence for granted, but the fact that a sense of morality exists at all is an incredible thing, and we should take the time to consider where ours comes from. So where does yours come from? The way I see it, it can come from one of three places. It can come from yourself, what we might call a conscience. It can come from others, meaning experts in certain fields, your social group, family, and society as a whole, or it can come from a transcendent source. So, which makes the most sense? First, from yourself, your conscience. I actually think this is a valid place to get our sense of right and wrong. But how do we explain that this sense exists at all under a naturalistic viewpoint? It may come from social cues in the environment we are in, but then it's not really coming from us, it's coming from those around us. But since our community and social group is made up of other individuals, we are back at square one without a source for where their sense of morality came from that they in turn passed on to us. So then that brings us to our sense of morality having evolved over time to what it is today, which might seem like a rational and attractive explanation at first, but it comes with a few logical conclusions we have to reach. If our morality is the result of random mutations in our brains that happen to respond positively to certain stimuli, then we have to admit that absolute morality, the idea that there are certain things that are always wrong, does not actually exist, but that our sense of morality just happened to be advantageous for the evolutionary process to lead us to where we are now. So if absolute morality does not exist, then all moral accountability is meaningless. The Holocaust was only wrong because the Nazis happened to lose and were not successful in spreading their ideology all over the world. Anybody that has ever committed a crime is not actually accountable for their actions because the only reason they committed those crimes is because their brain happened to evolve in a way that led to those actions. If, in the words of well-known atheist Richard Dawkins, we are all just dancing to the tune of our DNA, how can anybody be held responsible for anything they do, good or bad? Some people do try to say this is the case, but we don't actually live this way. We care about truth, we care about logic, and we care about doing what's right. If we didn't, you would not be listening to me right now and would not care about trying to find truth. You would not care that people commit evil and that some people believe in things that you think they shouldn't. Why do we muster so much passion for the causes that we care about? Why do atheists like Dawkins spend so much of their time and effort trying to convince people of what they believe to be the truth of the world and get so angry when they see Christians not living up to their own standards? Or when they see passages in the Bible that seemingly go against what they believe to be right? Without absolute truth and morals, all these things come down to mere opinion, or even less than that, a random combination of matter and electricity that happen to form an opinion about the world. Do our hearts long so much simply for an agreement in opinion or a meaningless electrical current? I don't think that's the case, and because of this, I'm convinced that morality comes from an absolute transcendent source, God. And in addition to a sense of morality, we all feel a deep calling in our gut to do something with that morality, to give our life meaning. This is what I think is the ultimate call of all humanity. This search for meaning to make a difference supersedes every other drive we may have. We can go without sex, money, power, fame, and any other pursuit and be happy if we feel our life has meaning. But all too often, people that have seemingly ideal lives and have achieved everything imaginable, they feel hollow and empty in that their life is devoid of meaning. In one of my favorite books of the Bible, Ecclesiastes, Solomon talks at length about the futility of a life lived chasing after things of this world and trying to use them to find meaning in our own life. In the first chapter of that book, the author describes the view of the world we take if we place all our value in this world and nothing more. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher, utterly meaningless, everything is meaningless. What do people gain from all their labors at which they toil under the sun? Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun sets and hurries back to where it rises. The wind blows to the south and turns to the north. Round and round it goes, ever returning on its course. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place the streams come from, there they return again. All things are wearisome, more than one can say. The eye never has enough of seeing, nor the ear its fill of hearing. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which one can say, look, this is something new? It was here already, long ago, it was here before our time. No one remembers the former generations, and even those yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow them. This is what happens when we try to create our own meaning or seek out meaning in things that ultimately have none under a naturalist view. We fall short, we're dissatisfied, we achieve all the things we think will give our life meaning, and we still feel this deep hunger for more. So we think we must need different things or different pursuits, and the cycle begins all over again. If we're purely the accidental result of a series of chemical reactions and firing neurons, then life truly does have no meaning, and even discussing it is nonsensical and pointless. We could be the greatest philanthropists in the world, committing all kinds of unimaginable acts of kindness, and it will be utterly pointless when the universe implodes on itself and everything disappears into insignificance. The terrifying logical conclusion of this nihilism can be seen in the actions and thoughts of people like the Columbine shooters, who saw the world as being completely pointless and beyond hope, and were doing their part in getting rid of the scourge of humanity and bringing us a little closer to our inevitable fate of annihilation. And yet, even in this broken way of thinking, we still see a glimmer of attempting to find meaning by a twisted attempt to fix the world. There's still a desire to make a difference, even if it is a profoundly negative one. So even when our sense of morality and humanity is completely broken, we cannot escape the need to find meaning in our lives. There are some who acknowledge this inherent need to find meaning, and yet believe that everything is meaningless at the same time. So in order to avoid the psychological breakdown that comes with living a life lacking morality and meaning, they simply pretend it exists in order to avoid the negative consequences. This view is called absurdism. I actually do commend adherents to this view for being logically consistent in their reasoning of where a naturalist view leads. But what is amazing to me is that the innate need for meaning does not initiate further questioning and investigation from them. If we have such a strong need for meaning that living a life as if it doesn't exist would lead to insanity and complete psychological meltdown, shouldn't we reconsider our presuppositions that naturalism is the rational choice? So, why am I spending so much time talking about morality and meaning instead of focusing on specific scientific arguments? The whole point of me talking to you today is to try and communicate what was the strongest argument for the existence of God and Jesus for me. All of the specific scientific evidence is interesting and useful information, and there's enough there for a lifetime of learning. But the foundation that I keep coming back to when I personally have doubts is this innate sense of morality and meaning that I feel, and that I think all humans feel. The existence of that inner voice and those gut feelings just don't make any sense under a purely naturalist view of the universe. Science is a process of continuous discovery and learning about how our world functions at a mechanical level, but it cannot tell us what ought to be. It can only tell us what is. And ultimately, scientific issues like the age of the universe and the exact mechanisms of how it came to exist are not central to the claims of Christianity. There are extremely intelligent and devoted followers of Christ that believe in young earth creationism and old earth, theistic evolution, intelligent design, and many other variations of these things. But the central thread that they have in common is believing in the story of Jesus. That is the center of Christianity on which our entire story and meaning hinge. So let's dive more into that. So Christians believe that the reason people have a difficult, if not impossible time living out this nihilistic view is because we have been hardwired by God to live with purpose and meaning. This is why even people who ultimately believe life has no meaning will still live as if it does. This is why even if we are aiming at lives at the wrong thing, we are still aiming it at something, and that when we don't aim at anything, we sink into depression. The Christian story makes sense of this experience and explains why humans, even those who deny God and have no explanation, still live their lives as if they do have purpose. The reason we do so is because we're made in the image of God, but our progress is thwarted by the effects of sin in the world, which throws off our compass and leads us to seek in the wrong places. So we seek and seek, but because we're not looking in the right place, we feel this sense of despair as we come to realize that our accomplishments will eventually be nothing. This is a super harrowing realization when we take the time to think about it, and it's hard to not come away from such a realization without feelings of complete despair. But in all this, at the heart of the Christian story, we have the fact that through the death and resurrection of Jesus, God has rescued us from our sin and purposelessness and given us an ultimate and eternal purpose. So what exactly is that purpose? That through our work as ambassadors of God on earth, we help to bring his kingdom here in order to bring about an eternal happiness and salvation. NT Wright talks a lot about this in his book, Surprised by Hope. That through the Christian story, God is working towards the unification of heaven and earth, and that is part of our job as humans created in his image to help that process along and do our part in making it a reality. This is what ultimately can give our lives true and lasting meaning, knowing that we are beings created in the image of God in order to bring about his eternal kingdom. Not only that, but in Jesus, God gives us a model for how to actually live a life aimed at this ultimate meaning. So we're not left wandering and wondering, never being able to find higher meaning in life. If we are honest with ourselves, I think we all feel this external call and desire for something that seems just out of our reach, and the things of this world do not seem to satisfy this deeply felt hunger. C.S. Lewis talks about this a lot and argues that every natural desire we feel has a fulfillment here on this earth. We feel hunger and thirst, and we live in a world with food and water. We feel sexual desires, and sex exists. So when we feel a strong desire for something that nothing in this world can seem to fulfill, we should carefully consider whether our assumptions that this world is all that exists are accurate, or whether there's more out there that we have yet to truly discover. As we talk about existing assumptions about the world, it's important to confront and acknowledge ones we may hold before we go further into discussing evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. All this talk of morality and meaning is all well and good, but do we actually have any reason other than internal feelings to believe that Jesus is the best explanation for these things? I believe we do, but in order to examine the evidence seriously, we need to first confront the fact that we may already be deciding what's possible and impossible, eliminating any chance of objectively examining evidence that goes against those presuppositions. If we come into this conversation assuming that the natural world is all that exists, no amount of evidence to the supernatural or miracles such as the resurrection will convince us, because we have already made the assumption that it is impossible. Here's an example. In a debate with Christian apologist Frank Turek, the late Christopher Hitchens made a comment that I thought was a great example of this thought process. At the beginning of the debate, before either person had really begun to present their arguments, Hitchens asked Turek if he believed in the virgin birth. When Turek replied that he did, Hitchens quipped, "I rest my case." His point was that Turek had already lost the debate because he believed something that went against Hitchens' already held worldview of naturalism, even though the validity of that worldview was the entire point of the debate in the first place. So we have to be willing to accept that there may be more to the world than the directly observable material we see. If we come to this with a presupposition of materialism, no amount of evidence can convince us of what we believe to be a philosophical and physical impossibility. 18th century Scottish skeptic David Hume shared this view. He claimed that no one could be confident in the actual occurrence of a miracle because it would, by definition, violate the laws of nature. Therefore, miracles are not to be believed because they go against the most immediate and observable realities of nature, making them highly improbable. But this is circular reasoning. Hume, Hitchens, and others that hold to this view are simply excluding evidence for miracles at the outset. While it seems rational at first glance, all they're really doing is taking one set of generally observed principles, natural laws, and using them to disallow other observed experiences and the physical evidence that supports them. So please acknowledge any biases that you might hold about the world and about the existence of the supernatural, and let's work around them while we examine the evidence for the death and resurrection of Jesus. Then you can come to your own conclusions based on the evidence that exists, even if it challenges views you may have previously held. The death and subsequent resurrection of Jesus is absolutely central to the Christian story. Without it, Jesus is not simply a good teacher like some people suggest. He is either who he says he is, the Son of God, or he is a raving lunatic. He did not leave us with this milquetoast middle ground that some people choose to believe in. People like to think that Jesus was just a great teacher, but if someone today said some of the things he did, we would label them insane and probably very dangerous. Let's look at a few examples. Matthew 28:18. And Jesus came and said to them, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me." John 10:30. I and the Father are one. John 14:16. Jesus said to him, "I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." If these things were said by a normal human, they're the meaningless ramblings of somebody with delusions of grandeur, and that's it. But if they're said by the one who is actually the way, the truth, and the life, who is actually one with God, and whom all authority has actually been given to, then he is the most important person to ever live, and in him lies the meaning of life. So, if we strip Christianity of its miraculous nature, it ceases to mean anything or have any coherence whatsoever. In 1 Corinthians 15:14, Paul says, "And if Christ has not been raised, our preaching is useless, and so is your faith." This is the linchpin that holds all of Christianity together, so it's worth examining closely. Is the Christian story true, or is it just a beautiful lie? An exceptional piece of fiction that serves only as a false comfort in a meaningless world? Let's talk about the existence of miracles as a whole. Biblical events like the virgin birth and the resurrection of Jesus, among others, definitely qualify as miraculous and defying natural law. So we first need to be open to the existence of miracles as a category before we can talk about the truthfulness of the Bible. So while some people say that miracles can't exist because they defy natural law, others say they can't be trusted as reliable because they cannot be proven empirically, which is validated and proven in a controlled scientific setting. So there's a few problems with this line of thinking. First, like we talked about last week, science is only one limited method of coming to truth. For example, if we say that the only things we can believe in are things that can be validated empirically, is that belief based on empirical evidence? Or is it a pre-existing worldview based on faith that then determines how we view evidence from that point forward? Testimony, direct experience, and physical evidence are all valid means to truth and understanding of past events. People all throughout history, as well as today, have attested to the reality of miracles. A lot of these people were well-educated, reputable, and skeptical as to the existence of miracles before it happened to them. So, how do we come to terms with the countless examples of people claiming to have miraculous experiences? If a naturalistic explanation is always more probable than a miraculous one, how do we explain so many accounts of them across so many locations and times? There's 4 ways to handle this outside of taking them as reality. First, we can chalk it up as fraud. People are simply lying for money, power, sex, status, some other motivation. Hallucinations. People only think they experienced something that in reality they did not. Third, psychosomatic healing, which basically amounts to the placebo effect. The mind being capable of healing the body because we're so convinced that we will be healed. And then finally, wish fulfillment. We want miracles to be true so badly that we see them where they don't actually exist, because miracles are a great comfort in a cold world of indifference. So are these the best explanations of first-hand accounts of miracles? They are definitely true in some cases, Miracles are not common, and if they were, they would not be miracles, and these reasons can certainly explain some of them, but I don't think this naturalistic explanation is capable of explaining the vast array of miraculous claims that actually exist, especially not the ones found in the Bible. The reason is that discounting the validity of so many experiences requires having a faith in your own limited experience above and over the experience of so many eyewitnesses throughout history and today. And as we get into the story of the resurrection, we'll talk about those eyewitness accounts. So what I think might make more sense is to doubt your own limited experiences and seriously examine the claims of so many people throughout history, even if what they're saying goes against the preconception that you have about the way the world works. I think that a better approach is that the existence of miraculous claims points to the existence of something that transcends our natural laws that we are subject to. Natural laws are a great way of explaining what normally happens, but that does not in turn mean that what normally happens is what is always going to happen. So if we deny the possibility of the existence of God, then it makes sense not to believe in miracles. But now we're back to the circular reasoning we addressed earlier. We cannot empirically prove that God does not exist, so we're taking a leap of faith in believing that he does not. If this belief is called into question, the logic and evidence leads to the opposite direction, that miracles do exist. So, if we can accept the possibility of the existence of God who stands outside of our natural laws and is not subjected to them like we are, then the existence of miracles is not at all improbable, and we have good reason to be open to the existence of miracles and the Christian story. So let's get to the specifics of the miraculous accounts of events in the Bible. Can we take them seriously, or is the Bible unreliable and outdated? A good part of what we've talked about today is why we should take the story of the Bible seriously. Historian John Dickson tells us why the story fits with the way we experience the world and how, in addition to historical evidence, this gives credibility to what it says. So this is what he writes. I believe the Bible is so popular and influential because it tells a story we recognize as true. I don't just mean it tells an accurate story. What I mean is that its account of humanity and the world we live in rings true. Reading the Bible can be like meeting someone you don't know who oddly somehow seems to know you deeply. It is uncanny. Sometimes when you read the Bible, you find yourself asking, how does the book know that about me? How does it know that about our world, especially when it was written so long ago? One of the most powerful things you can do is to read the Bible for yourself, rather than gleaning your understanding of it from culture and people around you. Grab a good commentary series and read through it yourself. It is the single biggest thing you can do to understand the Christian story and can serve as a formidable defense of Christianity if you read it with an open heart and mind. The reason I say grab a good commentary series is because good commentaries allow you to read it with the proper context and understanding of the purposes and intentions of different authors and books of the Bible, so that you can understand their purpose and you're not reading it out of context, and perhaps even more importantly, you're not reading it through a 21st century lens. You're reading it through the same context and lens of the people that wrote it. So I highly recommend the Old and New Testament for Everyone series. The Old Testament for Everyone is by John Goldingay, and the New Testament for Everyone is by NT Wright. They have commentaries for every single book of the Bible. So I do highly recommend reading the Bible for yourself. However, I also understand that in order to get to a place of being willing to read the Bible and being open to its message at all, we might need a foundational reason for why we should take it seriously in the first place. So I'm going to offer some of the biggest reasons why I think you should do so by going through the most central story in the Bible, Jesus and the gospel. Not only is Jesus himself central to the gospel story, but he held the Hebrew scriptures of the Old Testament in high regard. So if we get ourselves to the place where we believe Jesus is who he says he is, it becomes a lot easier for us to accept the legitimacy of these other pieces of scripture, and it becomes easier for us to accept the writings of the apostles since he personally appointed each of them. As other questions come up about specifics in the Bible, which they 1000% will, I highly encourage you to look into those issues. I've provided multiple books as starting points for you to do so below this video. Why should we take what the New Testament gospel accounts say seriously? Contrary to other religions and worldviews, which are based on ideas and theories, Christianity is actually based on a single historical event. Because of that, it's falsifiable. While the existence of God may not be able to be disproven and is not falsifiable, Christianity itself actually is, which means that it can be disproven and so can be approached from a scientific angle. The Bible itself actually encourages us to think deeply about these issues, test them, and hold on to what is good. Paul in 1 Thessalonians 5:21 tells us to test all things and hold fast to that which is good. But before we start examining the feasibility of what the New Testament says, we need to examine the reliability of the text itself. One thing I learned while I was looking into how the Bible actually came to be is that there is actually an amazing amount of consensus among historians, both Christian and secular, on the fact that Jesus existed. Oxford scholar Christopher Tuckett says this of the evidence for the existence and life of Jesus. All this does at least render highly implausible any far-fetched theories that even Jesus' very existence was a Christian invention. The fact that Jesus existed, that he was crucified under Pontius Pilate for whatever reason, and that he had a band of followers who continued to support his cause seems to be part of the bedrock of historical tradition. If nothing else, the non-Christian evidence can provide us with certainty on that score. So a lot of the time, people's opinions of the unreliability of the New Testament is grounded in unfounded conspiracy theories or their own presuppositions. Again, one of the reasons it's super important to look into this stuff yourself instead of just accepting what other people say about it. A lot of people are unaware of how strong the historical evidence of Jesus actually is. The common views that the New Testament is untrustworthy, invented much later than it claims to be, or is just a fake do not hold up to any serious scrutiny. First, we have nearly 6,000 manuscripts of the New Testament in the original Greek, and over 18,000 in early translations into other languages like Latin. On top of this, there are thousands of quotations of the New Testament by early church fathers in their writings, so many that even if we lost all of the partial and complete manuscripts we have, we could still reconstruct a significant portion of the New Testament just from these quotations of the early church fathers alone. We have more ancient surviving manuscripts of the New Testament than any other ancient piece of writing. So what about copying errors? A lot of people say that because the Bible has been copied so many times over the centuries, it's unrecognizable from its original text and therefore is unreliable. But again, that claim doesn't have any foundation. John Lennox describes it like this. Take, for example, a manuscript that was written about 200 AD and is therefore some 1,800 years old. How old was the manuscript from which it was originally copied? We do not know, of course, but it could very easily have been 140 years old by the time it was copied. If that were so, then the manuscript were copied when many of the New Testament authors were still alive. Thus, we get from New Testament times to today in just 2 steps. So while it's true that when copying manuscripts by hand like they used to have to do is virtually impossible to not make some mistakes, no 2 manuscripts have exactly the same mistakes, and we have enough surviving manuscripts that we can reconstruct the original text to a point where expert opinion is that less than 2% of the resulting text is uncertain. A large portion of that uncertainty is small linguistic differences that make no difference in overall meaning. And then add to that the fact that no single teaching of the New Testament relies on just one single passage. There's not a single Christian doctrine that is called into doubt as a result of these minor inconsistencies in copying over the years. Sir Frederick Kenyon, who is a leading ancient manuscript historian, sums it up like this. The number of manuscripts of the New Testament, of early translations from it, and of quotations from it in the oldest writers of the church is so large that it is practically certain that the true reading of every doubtful passage is preserved in some one or another of these ancient authorities. This can be said of no other ancient book in the world. So, I know these facts do not absolutely prove the validity of the New Testament beyond any possible doubt, but ignoring them or dismissing them would be a failure to follow the evidence where it leads in exchange for adhering to our existing presuppositions. This is one of those cases where, although I don't necessarily think we can prove it 1,000% so that nobody could ever argue against it, I think it is far more unreasonable to assume that it's unreliable than it is to assume that it's reliable. So, now that we've established the validity of the words themselves, let's take a look at what they actually say about Jesus. There are 2 kinds of reasoning we can use when we approach knowledge about the world. We can use inductive reasoning, where we use repeatable experimentation and analyze the results to prove or disprove our hypothesis. This is the kind of reasoning that we learn in high school when we learn the scientific method and perform experiments in science class. But we can't take this approach when we try to learn about non-repeatable historical events. In order to gather information about events like this, We have to do our best to eliminate our preconceptions and examine the facts as they are available to us to reach the most probable conclusion. To quote one of my favorite fictional characters, Sherlock Holmes, "It is a capital mistake to theorize before one has data. Insensibly, one begins to twist facts to suit theories instead of theories to suit facts." So, we have to gather our data and follow it where it leads. When Holmes reasons deductively, he starts off by saying, if suspect A was the murderer, then certain things, X and Y, would follow. He observes X and Y and says suspect A is a good fit. However, after that, he notices event Z happened, which suspect A could not have caused. Suspect B could have caused X, Y, and Z, and so he decides suspect B is a better fit. This process is then repeated with all the valuable evidence until the most probable suspect reveals himself. This approach is called abduction, and it's very common to how we reason things in our daily lives, and is the process we have to follow in order to evaluate whether or not the gospel accounts are true. To quote Arthur Conan Doyle's iconic character again, it's an old maxim of mine that once you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Real quick, I want to go back to our preconceptions about the world. I want us to change what we think is impossible. Just because something defies the natural laws that we are subjected to does not mean it is impossible. When you think of impossible, I want you to think of something that is logically impossible. And then the way I want us to kind of approach the historical evidence of Jesus is based on the facts available to us, which explanation makes the most sense. And in order to do that and follow the evidence where it leads, we have to be okay with the fact that maybe there are some things about the way the world works that we do not understand. So, let's go forward by eliminating the impossible and see what remains. There's 5 main points I want to discuss in order to reason out why I think the story of Jesus is historically accurate. Those are the death of Jesus, the burial of Jesus, the empty tomb, the grave clothes, and the eyewitness accounts. First, if Jesus rose from the dead, it is necessary for him to have died in the first place. We've established that most historians agree that Jesus lived and died by crucifixion under Pontius Pilate. Some people claim that he did not actually die, but somehow faked his death. Roman executioners were not idiots and knew a dead body when they saw one. They did this for a living and would have faced severe consequences if they had botched an execution, so saying he faked his death is a statement that does not have any backing. Furthermore, John's account talks about how they pierced Jesus with a spear in order to make doubly sure he was really dead. John goes on to say that blood and water poured out of his body. So we now know that most likely this means that Jesus had been dead long before they speared him, and the blood had settled and already separated into plasma and the actual red blood itself. So John could not have known the pathological effects of Jesus being stabbed by that spear, so him describing it this way is a strong piece of circumstantial evidence in favor of the occurrence. So next, the tomb Jesus was taken to is significant. 2 Jewish officials, Joseph and Nicodemus, are on record as having taken him to the tomb. In addition to this, there are other witnesses who saw Jesus' body delivered to the tomb. If his body had simply been thrown into a mass grave, it would have been very difficult to determine what had actually happened to his body afterwards. The tomb was also new, unused by anybody else, so confusing his body with someone else's was not possible. The method of burial also makes the possibility that he was simply unconscious unbelievable. He was buried with about 35 kilograms of spices, which was the custom when burying someone of importance, and the cloths would have been wrapped tightly around his body. When John and Peter discovered the tomb, the clothes were in the exact same place they were when he was placed in the tomb, suggesting his body had passed through them while they remained in place. And even if he had managed to escape and then placed the cloths in the exact same spot, there was a large stone placed in front of the tomb that had been rolled away when the tomb was discovered on Sunday. On top of that, the Pharisees had requested guards be placed on the entrance to the tomb in order to prevent the disciples from taking the body. Interestingly, the first people to report the tomb empty were the Pharisees, not the Christians. Most likely, they said it was empty in order to get the jump on Christians saying he was resurrected. By getting out in front of the scandal, they hoped to construct their own narrative for the tomb being empty. This shows that the tomb was in fact empty. Otherwise, what possible reason could the authorities have had for saying it was? If the tomb had not been empty, the authorities would have had no trouble producing the body of Jesus, and Christianity would have been dead on arrival. So what if his body was taken by grave robbers or the disciples? Grave robbers doesn't make much sense, since the only thing missing was his body. They left the valuable spices and inexplicably rearranged the grave cloths to match their original positioning at the time of burial. The disciples taking his body makes little sense either. This doesn't make much sense psychologically since they were not expecting a resurrection. This wouldn't have been something that would have made any sense to them at the time. They were all defeated and disappointed upon his death, wondering how their Messiah could have been defeated like that, so resurrection was not a common belief. Practically, the stone and guards present problems for the argument of anybody taking his body away without being noticed. And on top of all this evidence for the death, burial, and the empty tomb, we have multiple eyewitness accounts of people seeing Jesus after his death. The evidence for the fact that multiple people not only saw but interacted with Jesus is so strong that even atheist scholars admit it is historically accurate. Gerd Ludemann says it this way: "It may be taken as historically certain that Peter and the disciples had experiences after Jesus' death in which Jesus appeared to them as the risen Christ." That's from an atheist. But his atheism and the presuppositions that come with it prevent him from believing this actually happened, which brings us to his conclusion, one which others share, that the appearances of Christ to the disciples after his death were shared visions. But this goes against everything we know about hallucinations from psychology. First, a certain type of person is susceptible to hallucinations, and the disciples were of all different personalities, temperaments. A shrewd tax collector, working class fisherman, a born skeptic, not personalities typically associated with hallucinations, and not all the same personality. Second, there are no known instances of a group of people experiencing the same hallucination at the same time, which is exactly what would have had to happen when Jesus appeared to multiple disciples at the same time, which he did, and when he appeared to over 500 people at the same time, which he also did. Finally, hallucinations generally occur over a long period of time, either increasing or decreasing over that period of time. But Jesus appeared to the disciples for a very specific period of time, 40 days, and then never again after that. So, in order to think that Christ was simply the product of visions, we'd have to accept that multiple people suffered from the same hallucination over the same specific period of time. On top of all of that, hallucinations don't do anything to explain the other pieces of evidence resulting from his death and the empty tomb. So, taken as a whole, all of these pieces of evidence collectively led me to believe that the most reasonable explanation for these events is that the gospel accounts are true. One thing that I thought about a lot while I was reading this is my naturalism bent kicked in, and I would automatically assume, yeah, but these could easily just not be true. But what I realized when I did that is, because of how strong the historical evidence is for all of this stuff that happened, in order to do that, I would have to discount every historical event that ever happened. Because if this is not reliable, then that means that no historical event we have record of is reliable. Because we have more of a record of this and more surviving copies of manuscripts of these events than we do of any other ancient document in the entire world. One of the gospel writers, Luke, was actually an extremely dedicated, detailed historian. And he's one of these people that was extremely detailed in his writings and took the time to carefully consider what he was writing and make sure he only talked to people that were actually there. And then he would corroborate all of the accounts that they gave him, and that's how he wrote his gospel story, the Gospel of Luke. So all of that stuff taken together, I basically had only two logical choices. I could either say, logically, makes the most sense that Jesus actually lived, actually died, and was actually resurrected, which then led me to believe that Christianity is true. Or I could absolutely refuse to believe it was true no matter what, which means I would have to discount all of history, because if I'm going to go so far as to say that this can't be certain, then I have to go as far as to say that no history can be certain, and nothing in the world can be certain unless I am personally there to see it. And then on top of that, I am saying that my personal account of everything is more reliable than everybody else's account combined. If I'm only going to trust my specific personal experiences of something, then I have to discount logically everybody else's experience of the same thing, and that's not something that I'm willing to do, which led me to believe the accounts of Jesus presented in the gospel stories were true. So, critics have been attempting to disprove Christianity for 2,000 years and have not been able to do so because the evidence is so strong. This is one thing that I thought was super interesting, is that Christianity being based on a specific historical event means that for the entire religion of Christianity to come crashing down, all we have to do is disprove what happened with Jesus. And despite what a lot of people say, that science has disproven Christianity, it's not even a little bit true. It hasn't at all. So That was one of the main pieces of evidence that I followed that led me to believe that what happened with Jesus was true. So, with this strong evidence, we have a question to ask ourselves. Will we follow that evidence to where it leads, even if that's an uncomfortable place? If we want to approach it scientifically, we have to eliminate our presuppositions, we have to eliminate our biases, and we have to follow the evidence where it seems to lead. There is an incredibly large amount of scholarly work on the evidence of Jesus, and I've only briefly touched on a very, very small portion of it here. I really, really encourage you to dive into this topic, starting with some of the resources I've listed in the description below this video. There are some incredibly intelligent, detailed, hardworking people that have taken the time to document all of the historical and archaeological evidence for the claims of the New Testament, and they are going to do a much better job of addressing the likely dozens, if not hundreds, of specific questions you might have. So I'll link to some of those below. Highly recommend you give those a look. As you think about these things and go through your life, get those nagging pings for truth, morality, and meaning, stop to consider them. Stop to pray about them, even if it doesn't make sense to do so in that moment. These are literally the most important questions that we can wrestle with as humans, and our answers to them will determine the course of our life, both here and eternally. If Christianity is true, it is the most important thing we can do to follow the path before us laid by Jesus. When Jesus says to Pilate, right before his crucifixion, "I am truth," Pilate responds, "What is truth?" This is, I think, one of the central questions to our lives as humans. And too often we try to step in front of Jesus and answer Pilate for ourselves, creating our own meaning, creating our own truth, and this always ends in disastrous consequences, both on a personal, individual level and on a societal level. But if we look to Jesus as the source of that truth and seek to model our lives after his, we can have a taste of the things we seek but cannot find on this earth. The natural world and our own personal feelings about how it works are not enough in which to ground morality, meaning, and truth. I truly believe that God, the Christian story, and the person of Jesus are the only way to explain the world and to live lives that matter and have real, true, lasting meaning. So, I hope that in these past 2 weeks, I've given you enough to consider and explore on your journey to finding truth and meaning. Like I said, I've put another reading list together. It's down below this video. I've also included my personal email address. If anybody watching has more questions or simply wants to talk to somebody else about these things, somebody who struggles with them, with questions and doubts almost on a daily basis, please feel free to reach out to me via email. I'll be happy to talk about whatever you want to. Refer you to books, talk with you personally, whatever you want. So I hope that you'll continue to examine the evidence and follow it where it leads, and I pray that it leads you to finding fulfillment, happiness, and meaning in Jesus. I want to leave you today with my favorite quote from my favorite author who wrote my favorite book, C.S. Lewis, in his excellent book, Mere Christianity, which is a book that helped bring me to believe in the existence of God and Jesus more than any other book. If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world.
Good morning, Shiloh. I'm coming to you today or this week. I've been on about a 2,000-mile driving trip for work, and I'm actually in Carlsbad, New Mexico tonight. And the trip's given me a lot of time actually to think about things. One of the things I really was trying to put some effort into this week was our communion, and I wanted to bring something a little unique. And I was reminded this week of the parable of the prodigal son and how it parallels so much of the gospel story and what God and Jesus did for us on the cross. And I just wanted to share with you from Luke 15 a few verses and just some thoughts on that. Luke 15, starting in verse 11. Jesus also said, "A man had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of the estate I have coming to me.' So he distributed the assets to them." Now, I thought this was interesting. I thought about this probably the most because I remember reading this passage when I was a teenager, and money was a little more precious, a little more dear at the time maybe than it has become to me later in life. But I used to read that verse and go, well, why would the father do that? Why would the father take the initiative and give him his estate early?
I wouldn't do that. I would want to hold on to the money and give it to them when they're supposed to get it, which is when I pass on. And so I used to think about that, but that is so much like what God has done for us. The Father didn't have to do that, did not have to give up what he had at that time. But in the same way, God the Father has given up Jesus to the cross, to death, to torture for us in the same way that the Father in this story did for his Son. And so I think it's a direct parallel to that. The story goes on. Not many days later, the young son gathered together all he had and traveled to a distant country where he squandered his estate in foolish living. After he had spent everything, a severe famine struck that country and he had nothing. Let me describe how many of us have felt in our lives where we're given something, we squander it, and then things go bad after that, and we think it can't get any worse. We're at the bottom. He went to work for one of the citizens of that country who sent him into his fields to feed pigs. He longed to eat his fill from the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one would give him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired workers have more than enough food, and here I am dying of hunger? I'll get up, go to my father, and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired workers.'" And I think that describes often how many of us might have felt in our lives when we hit rock bottom. There is nowhere else to go except back to the one who gave us life, back to the one who sent us out, back to the one who gave us the gift to begin with. Well, how does the story end? He got up, he went to his father, but while the son was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran, threw his arms around his neck, and kissed him. Then the son said to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son." But the father told his servants, "Quick, bring out the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Then bring the fattened calf and slaughter it, and let's celebrate with a feast. Because this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." So they began to celebrate. The father loved it when the son came back to him. And again, as when I was younger, I used to read this and think, how can the father be so forgiving? He squandered everything. All the money that his father had worked for to will to him in his estate, his son blew it all on nothing. He had nothing to show for it. How disappointing would that be as a father? And yet the father celebrates his return. And I think that is a perfect example of what God has done for us through his son, Jesus Christ. We remember this time. We remember what Jesus did every week as a church. We eat the bread, we drink the cup, and sometimes maybe we were thinking about other things, but we are to be reminded that our Father is just like the Father in this parable. He gives us a great gift. He gave us that gift 2,000 years ago through his son. And we may go off and squander that, but we hit rock bottom and then we come back out asking for his help. And he joyously celebrates with us when we return to him. So I just encourage us this morning to celebrate what he has done for us through his son. This whole parable started with a gift. And the gift that we celebrate this morning is what God did for us in sending his son. Let's celebrate that together.
Do you feel the world is broken? Do you feel the shadows deepen? Do you know that all the dark won't stop the light from getting through? Do you wish that you could see it all made new? Is he worth